The continent's biggest crude oil producer has announced a plan for its energy transition from now till 2060. What are the numbers in Nigeria's plan, and can the biggest economy on the continent pull it off? We'll get into the details today. In South Africa, prosecutors have arrested some former executives of Transnet, accusing them of fraud. This is linked to the state capture probe of former President Jacob Zuma. And another Wednesday means we're looking at the challenges and strides of women in business across the continent. Welcome to Business Edge. I'm Tolulope Adeleru-Balogun. African Business Headlines is up first. The giant refinery being built in Nigeria by Africa's richest person, Aliko Dangote, is expected to start operations mid-2023. This comes from Nigeria's state oil company, which has a 20% stake in the project. It is believed that the NNPC will stop importing refined products next year once the 650,000 barrel a day refinery starts up and the ongoing rehabilitation of the state firm's own refineries is completed. The project, which also includes a fertilizer complex, started construction in 2016 and has been delayed several times. The Nigerian Communications Commission is introducing a new international termination rate, which takes effect from tomorrow, September the 1st. This is the second within 8 months. The NCC defines the rate as the cost of terminating international inbound traffic at a point of interconnection with domestic networks or by international carriers via international networks. It represents the domestic mobile network operators in Nigeria's exports of payment services. Kenya's Capital Markets Authority has approved a new digital-based collective investment scheme which allows a minimum 5 Kenyan shillings investments for market rollouts. The product is set to disrupt the segment of the markets where companies take a minimum of 1,000 Kenyan shillings from investors. Egypt's Minister of Electricity and Renewable Energy, Mohamed Sheker, has inaugurated a solar power plant with a production capacity of 10 gigawatts per hour annually in the northwest Gulf of Suez Economic Zone. The project's implementation came through a partnership agreement between Jushi and Inara Capital, a leading renewable energy company which is one of the economic zone's partners in green hydrogen projects. And staying in Egypt, the Minister of Finance, Mohamed Mait, says that the government is targeting cutting the debt-to-GDP ratio to 75% by 2026. He added that the country's debt ratio has fallen by around 15.6% to GDP during the period from 2016 to 2022, compared to an increase of 19.5% in other emerging countries. And those are a few headlines for you at this time. A big question we're asking: is Nigeria ready for an energy transition? A master plan has been launched, but do the numbers really add up? That conversation is coming up after the break. Across the continent, African countries continue to struggle to provide electricity to power homes and economies. The data says that of the 1.2 billion people on the continent, about half, that's 600 million people, live their lives without access to regular electricity. The continent's electricity access rate is the lowest in the world at just over 40%. And one of the places where this issue is most magnified is in Nigeria, the most populous country on the continent and Africa's biggest economy. With a population of 200 million, the Africa Development Bank says 85 million Nigerians, about 43% of the country's population, have no access to electricity. It is estimated that this gap costs the country's economy some $26 billion every year. Now, in order to correct this and catch up with the times, Nigeria's government has launched an energy transition plan. If completed, the country will achieve universal energy access by 2030. However, the requirements of the ambitious scheme are steep. It is believed that Nigeria will have to commit $10 billion a year to the plan for the next decade. And Nigeria's Vice President Yemi Osinbajo is currently in the U.S. to meet with Vice President Kamala Harris and other stakeholders, as well as to speak at the Center for Global Development about the plan. Talatu, Tarfa, an independent consultant for energy access, joins me now to break down Nigeria's plan. Talatu, welcome to Business Edge. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
So let's start with this. It's quite easy to get lost a lot of the times and focus on the numbers when it comes to a lot of the conversations about the economy and things on the continent. But behind the numbers, there's this very real impact of this lack of electricity on Nigeria's economy and the people of the country as well. So let's start from that. What's been the impact of Nigeria's inability to provide regular and even quality electricity for the country?
Indeed, the lack of electricity is affecting a lot of sectors in Nigeria. I mean, we see that the SMEs are struggling instead of growing their businesses and using the profits for expanding and scaling their businesses. They're left to use their profits to power their businesses, and this is definitely impeding their growth. We also see the health systems struggling. The healthcare facilities are struggling. I mean, according to UNICEF, Nigeria has the second national highest mortality rate in the world. And this is all due to a lack of electricity in the hospitals. So the impact is really huge, and it's damaging a lot of our sectors. So there is an urgent need to address this.
So while the issue is a massive one, and for many years, Nigerians have been having conversations about the lack of electricity, it didn't happen overnight. And the gap seems so insurmountable at times when you talk to those in the industry. So how did it get so bad for Nigeria, which happened to be one of the first countries to actually have electric streetlights, not just on the continent, but actually around the world as well?
Yes, interestingly. So over the years, we've seen Nigeria try to adapt to different reforms just to address our electricity issues. We see the privatization, we see the division into the discos, but still the gap still increases because apparently the world is not sitting and waiting for you to fix your energy issues. Economies are growing as long as people are increasing in number, populations increase, technologies are increasing, there'll always be an increase in demand for electricity. And because we haven't addressed our initial issues, we find that the gap keeps increasing. We also see that there's a blame game, the discos, the gencos, the transmission companies are blaming each other. But at the end of the day, we still see that there's a need for a huge infrastructure overhaul and development across the country. So the gap will continue to increase because energy demand is increasing every year all around the world, and Nigeria is no different from that.
Very true. So our sources of electricity right now typically come from fossil fuels, especially gas, which accounts for anywhere around 86% of the capacity that Nigeria has. Then you have the rest coming from hydropower sources. In a world that seems to be moving away from fossil fuels, many people were happy to hear transition in the title, which also means that Nigeria is quite cognizant of the fact that this has to move us towards a specific target. But let's talk about what the plan says in terms of where Nigeria will get this energy from. There's about 30-something years to 2060, which doesn't seem like it's not enough time. But Nigeria does unfortunately have a history of not always meeting its targets. So where does the plan see Nigeria getting energy from to 2060 to be able to completely eradicate the energy poverty?
Yeah, the Nigeria Energy Transition Plan is very encompassing because it looks across various sectors. It highlights 5 major sectors which have been identified as the chief users of electricity. We have the power sector, we have the industry, that's manufacturing and industry. We also have the transportation sector, we have the cooking sector, and we have, of course, oil and gas, because that is Nigeria's current and strongest energy resource. So the interesting thing about the plan is that it speaks to things like renewable energy adoption. It also speaks to the adoption of hydrogen, speaks to the adoption of biofuels for fueling our transportation vehicles. It also speaks to the use of biogas. So the transition plan speaks to an entire energy mix, not just one source of energy. It acknowledges the role that gas plays, of course, because we cannot completely ignore the elephant in the room, I would say. But it also speaks to quite a number of other resources in order to make the the transition very elaborate.
All right, so Taluta, let's hold on now. So Nigeria's energy transition plan was launched by the Vice President Yemi Osinbajo, and he said Nigeria will need to spend some $410 billion over the next 8 years to achieve universal power access. Let's hear from the Vice President himself.
Is perhaps the greatest existential threat of our lifetime. The most reliable evidence today shows that every inhabited region across the globe is already affected and that no place on earth will be immune to its effects. In Africa, the effects are expected to be particularly damaging. For instance, climate change threatens crop productivity in regions that are already food insecure. And since agriculture provides the largest number of jobs, reduced crop productivity will simply worsen unemployment. Yet from all indicators, as a global community, we are way behind schedule on the pathway to limiting warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial levels to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. It is certainly time for decisive action, and we just cannot afford to delay. African nations are rising to the challenge. All African countries have signed the Paris Agreements, and some countries, South Africa, Sudan, Angola, and Nigeria, have also announced net zero targets. But for Africa, the problem of energy poverty is as important as our climate ambitions. Energy use is crucial for almost every conceivable aspect of development: wealth, health, nutrition, water, infrastructure, education, and life expectancy are significantly related to the consumption of energy per capita.
And so that's Nigeria's Vice President there talking about the plan, talking about the need that the continent has as well, and this net zero target. But let's look at what Nigeria currently has on ground right now. The country currently generates around 4,000 megawatts, and to hit universal power access, Nigeria will need to generate about 180,000 megawatts, and that's about 45 times greater than current capacity. Does the math add up, as young people would say? Is the mathing right now? And in terms of what we see with the numbers coming out, are the numbers, the amount of money put to it, and the energy mix that's presented in the plan, will it help Nigeria achieve this target?
Indeed, the transition plan is what we call ambitious, or to make it a little bit better, we call it bold. It's very, very bold, and I think the whole world agrees with that. When we saw the amount of $410 billion to be spread across about 38 years to 2060, it sounds it almost sounds impossible. I mean, I know we've had several conversations and back and forth on how achievable this is. But coming to think of it, so there's another way you can look at this. It's all about perspective. Nigeria is basically declaring to the rest of the world, hey, we have a playing field. I mean, if you want to be a part of our energy market or energy system or sector, you have an opportunity to tap into this by committing a certain amount of financial instruments or whatever financial instruments or money you want to put down. You can access the Nigerian energy market by doing that. So, and also if you look at the energy transition plan, the financing plan is broken down into 5 sectors. And then it also included the infrastructure parts, because like I said, we have a grid connection already, but it needs heavy upgrade. So looking at it holistically, we cannot talk about energy transition in Nigeria without first talking about our energy poverty. So that $4 billion speaks to addressing the energy poverty that we already have, and then also speaks to the future energy plans for Nigeria. So it breaks that amount into power sector. The power sector accounts for over 200 billion of that amount. We also breaks it down into cooking, industry, how to acquire better industry facilities that are more low carbon friendly. So there's an entire transition going on, and I don't think after looking at the numbers, it's not too ambitious. We're just trying to say to the world that Nigeria is a large country, it has huge needs, and we need a lot of money to get to where we need to get to.
So you've mentioned the word ambitious. You've said others have also described this plan as bold. It is one that $10 billion at any given time right now is a lot of money, particularly for a country like Nigeria, because we also have a situation where we have large budget deficits. It was just a few weeks ago that it was announced that in the first quarter of the year, Nigeria's debt servicing costs actually exceeded the country's revenue. We know that the World Bank has pledged $1.5 billion. The Vice President is in D.C. to look for more funding, but it's also coming at a time when a number of countries are becoming a bit more internal in where they spend money and how they spend money. So beyond what is in the plan in terms of how they can raise the money, let's also look at this from a policy perspective. Do you think it's a little too ambitious? Or if we reframe that, Nigeria doesn't necessarily have a very good reputation for meeting all its targets and holding to the things. We have a lot of plans, we have a lot of papers, we have a lot of documents somewhere, but how many of those have we sincerely actually actualized? And then you add this to the mix. What do you think about that?
Indeed, we have a lot of targets we have set for ourselves, and as usual, we all pray that we don't shoot ourselves in the foot. I mean, we have a global reputation to keep up with. So we even see most recent our vision 30-30-30. Let's even look at that, because that is supposed to be accomplished by the year 2030, that we would have 30 gigawatts of electricity, and of which 30% will be sourced from renewable energy. We're about 7 years away from that, and generally we're still worried, but I feel like we have what it takes to actually implement that. We have a number of policies on local content development, and we have to begin to look into that, because there's only so much that the world can do for us. And we certainly have a responsibility to ourselves. So we have what it takes to begin to look at local manufacturing of panels and batteries within the country that we are yet to tap into and yet to explore. So if we indeed set ourselves these huge targets as the giant of Africa, then we need to take giant steps as well towards implementing our already existing world-class policies to begin to see them happening in Nigeria and meet our set targets.
All right, Talatu, before I let you go, it's a good thing you mentioned the batteries and renewables, because not only did the Vice President launch the Energy Transition Plan, he also announced a Universal Energy Facility. And under this scheme in particular, solar energy companies and providers would also receive grant payments to help scale their operations, which also means we'd have a quicker route to getting more solar energy to small and medium-sized companies across the country. What do you make of this aspect of it as well?
Yes, so the UEF, which is the Universal Energy Facility, is a multi-donor facility that is being managed by the SC4All team. And among other initiatives, I think this is a very good one as well, because it seeks to provide CapEx funding, which is initial funding. If you know much about the solar energy sector, you know that it has a huge initial cost that is very high. So the UEF is promising to provide about 40% of that funding for solar companies in the country that qualify for the program. And I think that's a great initiative, because it's looking at companies that are into energy as a service, aside from the mini grids who have gotten some kind of support in the past. We also have support going into smaller companies that can provide energy solutions. And I understand that the one for Nigeria is in the form of productive use, and to encourage the productive use of electricity. So I think it's a very, very great initiative, and kudos to the SC4All team. And I do hope to see a lot of our companies in Nigeria apply for the program and indeed qualify, because it would definitely help them to scale.
All right, Talatu, Tarfa, we'll leave it at that. The Vice President is in Washington. He'll also meet with U.S. President Kamala Harris, and we look forward to seeing what his trip and his mission on this energy transition plan brings for the country. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
All right. And you can follow us throughout the day. We'll be, of course, giving you updates of that on business as well. He's speaking to a number of stakeholders, as well as the Center for Development, Global Development. And we're going to see if Nigeria can come up with the funding needed for this year to put itself on the path to making sure that the energy transition plan does become reality. You're watching Business Edge. We have international business headlines coming up. Now, according to a survey of the service sector, UK firms reported surging selling prices, record high cost pressures, and gloomy outlooks for the future. The percentage of firms surveyed, which said they are feeling cost pressures, rose from 64 to 69%, even though growth is set to remain strong next quarter at 65%. The number of firms which reported increasing their average selling price went up from 23 to 31%, with businesses expected to continue passing on costs to customers next quarter. The British government bonds tumbled again, catching up with losses for the U.S. and German debts following a public holiday on Monday as markets digested remarks from Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. 10-year British government bond yields are on course for their biggest monthly rise since September 1986, when U.S. stock markets recorded what at the time was a record daily fall, with 30-year gilt yields rose above 3% for the first time since 2014. In Asia now, China's efforts to cap the yuan's losses against the dollar are being brushed off by yuan bears as growth prospects for the world's second largest economy remain bleak. The People's Bank of China set stronger than expected yuan fixings for 6 sessions to Wednesday, and analysts say at least 2 local banks pushed back against the weakness when submitting data for the reference rate. Hundreds of public housing apartments in Singapore, one of the world's most expensive cities, are being sold for over 1 million Singapore dollars, about $716,000 US, as COVID-related construction delays create a shortage of new units. At least 2 units have surpassed the $1 million mark in US terms, and the high prices are fueling talk of new government measures to try to cool thriving property markets. The FTSE 100 and global stocks were in the red as a sharp rise in job openings added to worries about the Federal Reserve's aggressive approach to bringing down inflation. The FTSE 100 lost early gains, losing 0.95% to 7,356 points, while the CAC in Paris advanced 0.36% to 6,199 points. In Germany, the DAX gained 0.38% to 12,941. Now, after the break, we are in South Africa, where prosecutors have arrested a number of officials of a public company. We'll get into the details of the allegations and how former President Jacob Zuma is linked to this case.